profound it threatened to recalibrate the very foundations of its most prominent families. For months, the question had lingered like a persistent ghost in the corridors of the General Hospital and the opulent, yet vulnerable, rooms of the Quartermaine mansion. Who shot Drew Cain? The act itself was a violent punctuation in a saga of corporate warfare, personal vendettas, and profound identity theft. The victim, Drew, had only recently reclaimed his life after being usurped by his nefarious twin, Peter August, and to have that life nearly snatched away again in a blaze of gunfire was a cruelty that resonated through the entire community. The investigation, led by the doggedly determined Detective Harrison Chase, had been a maze of dead ends, false leads, and red herrings, with suspicion falling at various times on shadowy business rivals, embittered former associates, and even those within his inner circle. But this week, the maze had an exit. The shooter's identity was finally revealed, and the shockwaves are still rippling outward, leaving shattered alliances, moral quandaries, and a new, more dangerous chapter in their wake. The revelation did not come in a dramatic, public confession or a high-speed chase culminating in a standoff. It arrived, as such truths often do in Port Charles, in a quiet room thick with unspoken dread, a consequence of mounting pressure and a single, overlooked piece of evidence that could no longer be ignored. The focus had, for a time, narrowed intensely on the bitter corporate war between Drew's company, Aurora Media, and the enigmatic, ruthlessly ambitious Valentine Cassadine and his Bailey company. The two men were locked in a battle for a critical government contract, a deal that represented not just immense profit but immense influence. Valentine, with his Cassadine bloodline forever marking him with a legacy of villainy and cunning, was a natural suspect. He had the motive, the resources, and a moral compass that was known to be flexible. Drew, representing a more modern, principled form of power, was a direct threat to Valentine's ambitions. The animosity was palpable, their confrontations laced with a cold fury that suggested violence was not just possible, but inevitable. Yet, as the investigation wore on, Valentine seemed to possess an unshakable, almost theatrical alibi. The lack of concrete evidence tying him to the shooting was frustrating for Chase, who could feel the man's involvement in his bones but could not build a case that would stick. Suspicion then drifted, as it so often does, toward the shadows. Could it have been a hired gun, a professional brought in to eliminate a problem with cold, impersonal efficiency? This theory gained traction, suggesting that the true mastermind was someone who wanted Drew gone but lacked the stomach or the skill for the act itself. The list of potential clients was long, each with their own grudge, their own secret that Drew's integrity and investigative resources at Aurora threatened to expose. The break in the case, the moment the entire city had been waiting for, was as subtle as it was devastating. It was not a smoking gun, but a digital footprint. A security camera from a building blocks away from the shooting, its angle previously deemed useless, had captured a fleeting reflection in the window of a parked car, a figure, mostly obscured, but with a clear, identifiable watch on their wrist. The enhancement technology was slow, painstaking, but eventually, the blurry image resolved into a distinct, unique timepiece. It was a vintage model, rare and valuable, one that Detective Chase had seen before. He had noted it subconsciously during an interview, a passing observation that now screamed with significance. The watch belonged to none other than John Jagger Cates. The name sent a different kind of chill through the Port Charles Police Department and through those who knew the longer, more tangled history of the city. Jagger Cates was not a corporate raider or a shadowy assassin. He was a former flame of Carly Spencer, a man from her wilder, more tumultuous past in Florida, who had recently re-entered the orbit of Port Charles. His return had been under the guise of a legitimate business interest, but his history was one of rough-edged dealings and a temperament that ran hot. He and Drew had no obvious, direct conflict. They moved in different circles, their paths crossing only peripherally through Carly. This made the connection all the more baffling, and all the more intriguing. Why would Jagger Cates want Drew Cain dead? The interrogation room at the PCPD was a sterile, unforgiving box, and within it, Jagger Cates looked both cornered and defiant. Detective Chase laid out the evidence with a calm, relentless precision. The watch. The timeline placing him in the vicinity, an alibi that had now crumbled under scrutiny. The ballistics, while not a direct match to a weapon in his possession, were consistent with a type of firearm he was known to have owned in the past. It was a circumstantial case, but a strong one, woven together with threads of logic and digital proof. For hours, Jagger said nothing, his lawyer advising silence. But as the pressure mounted, a different story began to emerge, not one of cold-blooded attempted murder, but one of tragic error, misidentification, and a rage born from a twisted sense of loyalty. Jagger, it turned, had not been aiming for Drew Cain at all. His target was Jason Morgan. The confession, when it came, was not a proud boast but a weary, anguished admission. Jagger had been nursing a deep, festering wound for years, a grudge against the man he believed was responsible for the death of his younger brother, Stone Cates. Stone's story was a foundational tragedy in Port Charles lore. A good-hearted young man who had contracted HIV and died a painful, premature death, is passing forever, altering the lives of those who loved him, most notably Robin Scorpio. While the disease was the literal cause of death, Jagger had always harbored a belief that Jason, with his dangerous lifestyle and his position as the enforcer for the Corinthos crime family, had led Stone down a path that made him vulnerable. He blamed Jason for the environment, for the influences, for not protecting his brother. It was a grief that had curdled into a bitter, relentless hatred over the decades. And then, Jagger had heard the news. Jason Morgan was back from the dead. After being presumed deceased in a tunnel collapse, rumors began to swirl that the legendary hitman had survived. For Jagger, this was not a miracle, it was an obscenity. It was a chance for the man who he believed had escaped justice for his brother's death to walk free once more, while Stone was forever in the ground. The rage he had suppressed for years erupted. He acquired a weapon. He began to stalk the places Jason was rumored to be seen. He was going to finish what fate had failed to do and deliver the vengeance he felt his family deserved. The fatal flaw in his plan was one that the entire city had been grappling with for months: the uncanny, and ultimately destructive, physical resemblance between Drew Cain and Jason Morgan. They were identical twins, separated at birth and leading vastly different lives, only to have their destinies violently intertwined. In the dim light of the evening, from a distance, seeing Drew in a moment of solitude, Jagger saw the square jaw, the steely posture, the blonde hair. He saw Jason. He saw the ghost he had come to kill. He took the shot, believing he was finally achieving a decades-old catharsis. It was only in the ensuing chaos, as the news spread that it was Drew Cain who lay fighting for his life, that the horrifying reality dawned on him. He had shot the wrong man. He had attempted to murder an innocent, a man who was a father, a brother, a pillar of the community, a man who had already suffered immeasurably at the hands of his own twin. The fallout from this confession was instantaneous and multifaceted, a seismic event that touched every corner of the interconnected lives in Port Charles. For Drew, the revelation was a bizarre form of closure. The random, impersonal nature of a corporate hit was one thing, but to learn that he was a casualty of a case of mistaken identity, a stand-in for the brother he was still struggling to understand, was a profound psychological blow. It reinforced the terrifying fragility of his own existence, forever tied to a man whose shadow was both a protection and a target. His recovery, both physical and mental, now had to incorporate this new, unsettling truth, that his very face was a liability, that he could be attacked for sins he did not commit, for a life he did not lead. The relief of knowing the who was now replaced by the existential unease of the why. For Carly Spencer, the news was a devastating whirlwind. Her history with Jagger was a complex tapestry of young love and shared rebellion. He represented a part of her life she had long since outgrown, but the memories were not entirely unpleasant. To learn that this man from her past had nearly killed the man she loved in the present created a violent dissonance within her. Her loyalty to Drew was absolute, her fury on his behalf was white-hot. Yet, intertwined with that fury was a pain of an old, residual affection for Jagger, and a profound sorrow for the tortured, grief-stricken man he had become. She was torn between a desire for the fullest extent of justice and a heartbreaking understanding of the pain that had driven him to such a terrible act. Her conversations with Drew were charged with this conflict, as she struggled to reconcile the man she once knew with the would-be killer he was now. The Quartermain household, Drew's newfound and often dysfunctional family, reacted with their characteristic blend of outrage, pragmatism, and melodrama. Tracy Quartermain was apoplectic, demanding that the Cassadine legal machine be brought to bear to ensure Jagger never saw the light of day again, even as she quietly acknowledged the bitter irony that the family's legacy of conflict had once again ensnared one of their own. Monica Quartermain, the matriarch who had already lost so much, felt a fresh wave of protective fear. Her son had been stolen from her once by Peter August, and now he had been nearly taken again because he looked like another son she had also lost. The revelation solidified her resolve to keep her fractured family close, even as the circumstances threatened to pull them apart. The family dinners became less about business and more about a silent, shared anxiety, an unspoken acknowledgement that their wealth and status were no shield against the ghosts of the past. Perhaps the most complex and tortured reaction was that of Jason Morgan himself. When the news reached him, his typically stoic demeanor cracked. Jason was a man who accepted the dangers of his own life as a matter of course. He had made peace with the fact that there were people who wanted him dead. It was an occupational hazard. But for his brother, a man who had chosen a path of transparency and honesty, to be gunned down in his place was an unbearable transgression. It violated his core code. A wave of guilt, cold and heavy, settled over him. His very existence was a threat to the people he cared about. His return from the dead, which he had hoped would bring stability and protection to his loved ones, had instead brought a new and direct danger to his brother's door. He felt responsible, and for a man like Jason, responsibility was a burden that demanded action. His immediate instinct was one of retribution, a need to confront Jagger and settle the score himself, a path that put him on a direct collision course with the law and with the pleas of those, like Sam McCall and Drew himself, who urged him not to escalate the violence further. The legal proceedings became a central drama. Jagger was charged with attempted murder, and his confession, while explaining the motive, did little to mitigate the severity of the crime. The district attorney's office, keenly aware of the high-profile nature of the case, was pushing for a maximum sentence. Jagger's defense, however, began to build a case around mitigating circumstances, the prolonged, unresolved grief, the temporary insanity upon hearing of his brother's alleged killer's return, the genuine case of mistaken identity. They painted a picture of a man not as a cold-blooded killer, but as a victim of his own trauma, a man who had snapped under the weight of a sorrow he had carried for 20 years. This narrative began to gain some traction, particularly with those in Port Charles who remembered Stone and the tragedy of his death. It created a moral schism in the community. Was Jagger a monster who needed to be locked away, or a broken man who needed help? The line between villain and victim became dangerously blurred. This ambiguity forced several characters to confront their own pasts and their own capacity for forgiveness. Robin Scorpio, Stone's great love, was thrown back into the epicenter of that old pain. She had made a life for herself, found love and family with Patrick Drake, and had worked hard to cherish Stone's memory without letting it destroy her. Jagger's actions felt like a desecration of that memory. To use Stone's name to justify an attempt on an innocent man's life was, to her, a profound betrayal. Yet, she also understood Jagger's grief better than anyone. Her conflict was a quiet, internal agony, a struggle between her medical oath to heal and her very human desire to condemn. The revelation also had unintended consequences for other simmering plotlines. With the shadow of the shooting no longer hanging over the corporate battle, the conflict between Aurora and the Bailey Company entered a new, more aggressive phase. Valentine Cassadine, now officially in the clear, felt emboldened, freed from the scrutiny of the police investigation. He moved more openly and aggressively against Drew's company, seeing its temporary leadership vacuum as a prime opportunity for a takeover. Meanwhile, the internal dynamics of the Corinthos organization shifted. Jason's focus was divided, his attention split between his business responsibilities and the very personal threat to his family. This created openings for old rivals and new enemies to test the boundaries of his power. As the dust begins to settle, the landscape of Port Charles is irrevocably changed. Drew's shooter may be behind bars, awaiting trial, but the peace that should have come with that knowledge remains elusive. Instead, a more insidious tension has taken root. Trust has been fractured in new ways. The knowledge that a face, a simple, biological coincidence, can be a death sentence has left everyone feeling more vulnerable. For Drew and Jason, their bond, already complicated, is now strained by this shared burden of danger and guilt. Their interactions are laced with an unspoken acknowledgement of the threat one poses to the other, a tragic irony for two brothers who have only just found each other. The case is closed, but the story is far from over. Jagger Cates's fate now rests in the hands of the justice system, and the courtroom battles promise to be as dramatic as the shooting itself. The question of his sentence will force every character to take a stand, to publicly define their morality in the face of a terrible crime born from a relatable sorrow. Carly will have to choose between her past and her future. Jason will have to decide if the code he lives by can accommodate letting the legal system handle a personal vendetta. Drew must find a way to move forward without looking over his shoulder for the rest of his life, to not let the fear of being mistaken for his brother dictate his every move. And beneath it all, the memory of Stone Cates, a young man who represented innocence and tragic loss, has been violently thrust back into the present. His death, once a poignant part of the city's history, is now an active, volatile force, shaping events and destroying lives all over again. The revelation of the shooter's identity was not an end, but a brutal new beginning, proving once more that in Port Charles, the past is never truly past. It is a ghost that walks the streets, waiting for the right moment to step out of the shadows and pull the trigger. The tension pulsed through Port Charles like a storm ready to break as the week began, with people still reeling from Drew Cain's shooting. The whispers had grown louder, the theories wilder, and the pressure heavier on those closest to him. Drew remained unconscious, machines beeping rhythmically in his hospital room while his loved ones hovered anxiously. Sam sat at his bedside for hours, holding his hand, whispering encouragement, terrified to admit how close they had come to losing him again. "You have to come back," she said softly, voice trembling. "Danny needs you. Scout needs you. And I'm not ready to lose you." Meanwhile, Anna Devane and Dante Falconeri were across town piecing together the scattered clues that had led nowhere, until the moment a new piece fell into their hands, turning everything upside down. The PCPD finally received the ballistics report that linked the bullet in Drew's chest to a specific gun, a weapon already associated with previous crimes. Dante stared at the evidence sheet, unease creeping across his face. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered. "Why would this person go after Drew?" Anna leaned over his shoulder and whispered, "Because Drew was in the wrong place at the wrong time, or he uncovered something he shouldn't have." They both knew the list of people capable of such an attack was full of dangerous names, but only one matched the latest lead. The room seemed to shrink as Anna pieced together the connections. It was a name they hadn't considered seriously before, someone who had stayed low profile, someone they assumed was no longer a threat. By midday, word spread that the shooter had finally been identified, but the PCPD was keeping the name locked down. Carly couldn't stand the silence anymore and stormed into the station demanding answers. "You owe me the truth," she snapped, voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Who put a bullet in Drew?" Dante tried to calm her, hands raised. "Carly, we're still verifying the final details." She stepped closer, eyes burning. "Don't do this to me. Don't treat me like I'm some bystander. Drew was nearly killed, and you know why? Because someone wanted to send a message." Dante looked away for a moment before quietly saying, "If we're right, this isn't just about Drew." Those words only tightened the pit in Carly's stomach. She could feel something terrible lurking beneath the surface, something calculated, personal. Elsewhere, Sonny Corinthos was already a step ahead. Brick had been digging behind the scenes, following a trail of encrypted messages exchanged days before the shooting. Sonny paced his office while Brick delivered the latest findings. "You're not going to like this," Brick warned. The shooter wasn't working alone. Someone hired him. Sonny's jaw tightened. "Who?" Brick hesitated. "We traced the payment to an offshore account used by someone who's been quiet for months, maybe too quiet." Sonny exhaled slowly, rage simmering under his controlled exterior. "So the past is coming back to bite us," he murmured. "Fine. Then we deal with it." But even with the clues swirling around him, Sonny didn't realize just how deeply this mystery cut into his own tangled history. Back at the hospital, Michael arrived just as Sam broke down, burying her face in her hands. He knelt beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "We'll get justice," he promised. "Whoever did this, they're not getting away with it." Sam nodded, but her expression showed her fear wasn't just about the shooter. It was about the possibility that Drew might not wake up. Their children had already endured too much, and she couldn't imagine explaining another tragedy to them. Just then, a faint movement from Drew's fingers caught her eye. Michael, look," she gasped. The monitor's soft beeping quickened. A moment later, Drew's eyelids twitched, and the world around them shifted. He was fighting to come back, and with him might come the truth they desperately needed. Anna and Dante arrived shortly after, hoping to speak with Drew the moment he regained consciousness. Sam glared at them with protective fury. He needs rest. Not an interrogation. Anna gently replied, Sam, I promise, no interrogation. But if Drew remembers anything, even a flash, it could help us stop whoever's behind this. Sam hesitated, then reluctantly allowed them to wait. Minutes later, Drew's eyes opened. Groggy and confused, he blinked as Sam leaned over him. You're safe, she whispered. You're at GH. Drew nodded slightly, wincing. His throat felt dry as sandpaper. What happened? He whispered. GE everything. Dante stepped forward. You were shot, Drew. Do you remember anything? Anyone? Drew's eyes unfocused for a moment, his thoughts drifting into the haze of memory. Then suddenly, his pupils sharpened. There was someone behind me. I heard a voice. It was familiar. Everyone leaned in closer as Drew strained to recall. He said, Tell your boss I keep my promises. That single sentence sent shockwaves through the room. Anna stiffened. Did he sound young? Old? Rough? Drew swallowed. Older. Confident. Like he'd done this before. Dante exchanged a look with Anna, confirmation of their suspicions. We need to show you something, Dante said. He gently pulled a photo from his jacket pocket and held it in front of Drew. Is this the man you heard? Drew's eyes widened, breath catching. Yes, that's him. Sam gasped. Oh my God. The identity was out. The shooter was Kiefer Maddox's estranged father, Ray Maddox, a name buried deep in Port Charles's darker files. A man connected to illegal arms deals, hired killings, and a grudge against Drew's business ties he believed destroyed his family. A man who had vanished years ago, until now. Once the news broke internally, chaos erupted. Carly walked into Sonny's office moments before Brick delivered the update. It's him, Brick confirmed. Ray Maddox. He's been spotted on the outskirts of Port Charles. Carly froze. Ray? Kiefer's father? After all these years? Sonny nodded grimly. He blames Drew for exposing the trafficking ring he worked for. He thinks Drew's involvement with Aurora ruined the syndicate that funded him. This wasn't random. Carly clenched her fists. Then let's end this. He doesn't get to take another person from us. Sonny's voice dropped low. We will. But he's not working alone. Someone paid him. Carly's blood turned cold. Who? Brick exchanged a glance with Sonny before answering. We're still tracing it, but the account activity matches someone close to home. Meanwhile, Anna briefed Jordan and the rest of the PCPD with urgency. Ray Maddox is heavily armed, highly trained, and completely unpredictable. He will not hesitate to kill again. Jordan nodded. We move immediately. But as officers scrambled, Anna's phone buzzed. She stepped aside and answered sharply. Devane. A distorted voice came through the line. You'll never catch him. You're already too late. The line went dead. Anna felt a chill rush down her spine. Someone was orchestrating a much larger plan. Ray was just a pawn. She rushed back inside and announced, We're dealing with something far bigger than Ray Maddox. Someone else is pulling the strings. Across town, Willow found Michael pacing the hallway. What's going on? She asked softly. Michael ran a hand through his hair. It's insane. Drew finally identified his shooter. It was Ray Maddox. And the PCPD says he had help. Willow's eyes widened. Help from who? Michael hesitated. They think it's someone targeting Sonny's entire circle. Willow's breath caught. Then you're all in danger. Michael nodded. We always are. But this time, it feels different. Calculated. Personal. Willow stepped closer and held his hand. Whatever happens, we'll get through it together. He kissed her forehead, needing that reassurance more than he admitted. Back at the hospital, Drew insisted on sitting up despite the pain. If Ray Maddox is coming after me, he might come after others, he warned. Sam shook her head fiercely. You're in no condition to worry about anyone but yourself. Drew looked at her with steady resolve. I'm not letting this man hurt anyone else. Dante agreed. We'll keep a guard on your room 24/7. No one gets in or out without clearance. But even as he spoke, a shadow appeared outside the hallway, someone watching quietly from a distance. Someone with a burner phone in hand, typing swiftly. Seconds later, a message sent, he's awake. Evening fell with tension stretching across Port Charles. Sonny met with Dex at the warehouse, laying out new security protocols. Dex nodded firmly. I'll handle it. Sonny looked him in the eye. If Ray Maddox steps 1 foot near my family, or Carly's, he's done. Dex hesitated before saying, there's something else. Before the shooting, I intercepted chatter that didn't make sense until now. Someone wants to destabilize this entire territory. Sonny's expression darkened. Meaning this isn't just about Drew. Dex nodded. No. It's about you. Your organization. Your enemies. Sonny's jaw tightened. Then they're about to regret this. Meanwhile, Anna received forensic confirmation that the offshore account used to pay Ray Maddox belonged to someone who had been quietly rebuilding power, Valentine Cassadine. Anna felt her heart stop for a moment. No, she whispered. She desperately wanted to believe it was a mistake, a setup, anything but the truth that the man she once trusted could be involved. She stormed into Valentine's suite minutes later and slammed the door. Tell me you didn't do this, she demanded. Valentine stared at her, startled. Do what? She threw the evidence onto the table. You hired Ray Maddox to kill Drew Kane. Valentine's expression transformed from confusion to horror. Anna, I swear to you, I had nothing to do with this. Someone is framing me. Anna's voice quivered. Then prove it. Back at GH, Sam lay beside Drew, brushing her fingers through his hair while he rested. We're going to get through this, she whispered. I promise. Drew's voice was weak but certain. As long as you're here. I know. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed from the hallway. Sam bolted upright. What was that? The door burst open, and Dante rushed in. We've got movement. Ray Maddox was spotted inside the building. We need to move Drew now. Sam felt her knees weaken. He's here? Dante nodded. Go. Now. Security scrambled, staff panicked, alarms blared. Drew was lifted into a rolling bed as Sam clutched his hand tightly. Dante led the way toward a safer wing, but before they turned the corner, a figure stepped out from the shadows. It was Ray Maddox himself, cold, smiling, gun raised. Going somewhere? He asked darkly. Sam gasped. Drew tensed. Dante reached for his weapon, but Ray spoke first. Drop it, detective. Or your friend dies. Dante hesitated for a split second, but that was all Ray needed to step closer. I told you, Ray growled, eyes locked on Drew. I keep my promises. And the screen cut to a cliffhanger, leaving Port Charles shaken as the revelation of the shooter's identity spiraled into a deadly showdown that would chaw on.